In this segment, we'll explore your assumptions about how adults learn. Those assumptions are likely semi-conscious. As I say that and invite you to think about what's your theory of learning, you may or may not have a clear idea in mind about what's happening when people are going from a position of not understanding to a position of understanding. And is that at a visible behavior level? Is it at a cognitive level? Is it at a value and emotional level? Or all three in your mind? And how does that work? So if you're going to be facilitating learning, your understanding of how people learn will be an important part of the choices you make and the behaviors you exhibit when you're engaged in that process. So I'm inviting you now to think about what's your theory about how adults learn. A powerful quote for me comes from Saul Alinsky, quoted by Henry Mintzberg in an article in the Harvard Business Review. Alinsky said, "Most people do not accumulate a body of experience." Now, that's a very provocative statement in and of itself. He argues most people go through life undergoing a series of happenings which pass through their systems undigested. So that even if you've had what some people would call an experience, something happened, which is one of the concerns I have about experiential courses. There's a danger that to the extent people don't collect a body of experience, but they undergo a series of happenings that pass through their systems undigested, it implies a lower level, a lower percentage, a lower proportion of useful learning taking place. So Alinsky says, happenings become experiences when they are digested, when they are reflected on and related to general patterns and synthesized. So in another segment, we talked about Ken Bain's notion of superficial learning, of strategic learning, and deep learning. I think Alinsky is referring to that same phenomenon that some people, things happen and they really don't get anything out of it, whereas other people, things happen and they are paying attention. We could think of Ellen Langer's work on mindfulness or mindlessness. They're paying attention and benefiting from what happened because they've transformed that happening into an experience that has taught them something. So, age, in my experience, is no guarantee of wisdom. Just because you're older doesn't mean that you're wiser. Now, I know that this flies in the face of Confucian ethic, and it flies in the face of the general dictum, regardless of nation or region, to have respect for your elders and for your parents in particular. And yet, I invite you, in your own experience, when people get older, do they become more wise? Some do, I would say, and some do not. So age is not the indicator. The question would be the degree to which a person actually uses the events that have occurred in their lives as a way of learning compared with many who don't. Now, Carl Rogers, the famous psychologist, since passed away, his book on becoming a person was influential in my early development. The notion of how does a person become such? We have infants and they grow up, and Melanie Klein and Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and a variety of others have had many thoughts about how that process takes place. So if we think for a moment about what happens, Rogers has an interesting idea that periodically things will happen. You see something, you're in the midst of something, and this happening, shall we say, may generate some feelings, some emotions. I call this level 3. Our semi-conscious values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations about the way the world is or should be. I say semi-conscious because we may or may not be aware of what we're taking away from each of those situations. If we become aware, then we have moved to what I would call level 2, conscious thought. And there is a translation, Rogers asserts, between what's happened and what you are aware of. So some people might be flushed in the face, jaws clenched, their fists are tight, and you say to them, calm down, and they say, I am calm. They're clearly not at level 2 consciously aware of their state of being, their state of mind, and the aura, the behavior with which they're presenting to the rest of the world. So the ability to make what we might call translation number 1, that is mindfulness of what's happening around us, and then bringing that to a certain level of consciousness where we understand what's going on. There's a second translation, though, when we compare what we're thinking with what we say and do. This is what I would call level 1 behavior, the stuff that you can capture on film. And the translation there is, can I convert my thoughts into words and action? So I frequently will ask people, have you ever said, well, I know what I'm trying to say, but I can't find the words? And every hand in the room will go up. Everybody's been in that situation. Some people more frequently than others. And I would argue, brain chemistry aside, so my wife, for example, has ADHD, and there's a certain profile of level 1 behavior that goes along with that condition of brain chemistry. In the psychologist's Bible, now, and it's what, 4th or 5th edition, they like to call these things disorders. I prefer to think of them as profiles because they are the natural result of, in many cases, biochemistry balances or imbalances, more than 300 known hormones in the brain, and you get a little bit too much of one, a little bit too little of another, and you might find it difficult to articulate, or you might have synaptic connections that reverse the position of letters so that you're dyslexic. So if we call them profiles and they affect our ability to translate our thoughts into the words we speak to others, this skill, let's call it translation number 2, is an important skill to help people think about what they've learned or not learned from the events that have occurred in their lives.